I want you to move from overwhelmed by information to confident in what really matters. I want to help you move from being unsure towards direction and purpose in your healthcare. I want to introduce you to health experts. I want to let you in on tough conversations on women's health. I want to give you a place where you can lean in and learn how to take care of yourself. Let's transform your health. Let's get clear on your goals. This is Women's Health Unplugged. I'm your host, Dr. Jordan Robertson, Naturopathic Doctor. Welcome to Women's Health Unplugged. I'm Dr. Jordan Robertson. I'm a naturopathic doctor, and I'm the host of this show. Today, I'm joined by my colleague and friend, Dr. Ellen Wong. Ellen is a naturopathic doctor and the founder of the Joy Avenue, which is a resource for women with high-functioning anxiety, and that is going to be our focal point and conversation today. I want us to focus on and teach you whether or not you have high functioning anxiety. This is a concept that Ellen is an absolute boss at explaining, but also helping women come to terms with and understand how anxiety might be showing up in their lives, even though they get up, they go to work, and they do all the things. So thanks for spending time with me today, Ellen. I'm so grateful that we get to have this conversation together.
Thank you so much for having me, Jordan.
Can you walk us through, so the Joy Avenue, like that was a tip of the iceberg kind of explanation. I'd love for you to walk us through how you got to this place in working with these women. Because you are a brilliant woman. I've watched you lecture on multiple things from cardiovascular disease to, well, many things with your role as an instructor and professor. But now now you're narrowing down who you work with, and you've landed on these high functioning anxious women. Can you walk us through that process and how you got to this place in your career?
Absolutely. So this is the my breaking point. Let's start with that. Is basically almost getting arrested at the supermarket. That's essentially how this all started happening. So prior to that, I would say going through a lot of career fluctuations, life decisions, personal relationship issues, family issues, etc., etc., etc. Getting more and more anxious, trying to deal with it, but not fully dealing with it very well, working to compensate for how I was feeling. So now I'm putting in about 80 hours a week, if not more, and getting to the point where I was probably quite close to burning out fully, but not quite there. And one day I was at a grocery store and crashed my cart into another lady who was kind of coming down the aisle on opposite directions. And honestly, I don't even remember what she said to me, but she mumbled something, and it probably actually had nothing to do with me. But in my mind, I said to myself, like, you can't even grocery shop properly. Like, in my head, I failed at even that simple concept. And it's not logical. Like, there's no reason why I am failing at grocery shopping because somebody crashed their cart into me. Like, this is obviously not a logical thought pattern, but I had already talked myself into this point where I felt like nothing I could do was right. And I was living this kind of half double life where inside I was like really doubting my worth, my confidence, my capabilities. But outside people, I was the person that people went to get things done. I was that person that accomplished things well beyond what people expected to be accomplished. And so that inner turmoil and the negative mental chatter and all of that just kind of accumulated to that point at the grocery store where I literally just felt like I needed to leave. Like, I couldn't even do this right, and I had to leave. So I went to those checkout points where you self-scan your groceries or whatever. So I quickly scanned everything on my top shelf, forgot that there was a whole ton of stuff on the bottom shelf, and tried to run out of the supermarket. And that got stopped by security and then put into their security room. And then they called the cops on me. And so I sat there for 45 minutes waiting for the cops to decide if they were going to charge me for, I don't know, whatever criminal offense, I don't know, theft of the groceries or whatever. And then, anyways, it was not a pleasant experience because then they started asking me really personal questions about what I was doing, how much money I was making, how much money I have my bank account, do I have any credit card debt? I guess they were just trying to figure out if I was actually trying to steal or not. But I remember kind of leaving that whole situation, which, by the way, they fined me and banned me from that grocery store for a bit before I was allowed to go back. And I remember going home that night and just kind of being like, okay, whatever it is that I'm doing right now is not working. It's not okay. And I've got to figure out what I need to do. So I, at that point, was already a naturopathic doctor. So I threw everything in our arsenal at myself. I changed the way I ate, I exercised, I meditated, I journaled, I took my supplements, I did everything. But, and they all helped. Like, don't get me wrong, it definitely got me to the point where I was feeling a lot more physically comfortable. I didn't have all of the physical sensations, but like internally, that struggle was still there. And really, I kept trying a whole bunch of different things, trying to piece everything together. But the thing that really kind of fundamentally hit me one day was honestly, I had gotten so like stuck in my cycle of thinking and I couldn't find a way out of it that I really, this isn't something that I've shared with a lot of people, but like I like really thought about hurting myself because I couldn't figure out how to feel good. Like I couldn't figure out, like I was kind of calm because I took enough stuff and I knew what to do to like calm myself, but like it wasn't there. Like there was still something missing and I knew that I needed something more. And it was kind of around that time when I fundamentally realized that I wasn't a happy person. So I did this massive deep dive, which is what I guess because my coping mechanism is to do massive amounts of research around something. So I started doing a huge amount of deep dive into happiness and what that meant. And I mean the good thing that came out of this was that now I feel very comfortable with my research skills. But aside from that, I just fundamentally realized I wasn't a happy person and I needed help. And scroll forward several years, I was deciding where to go on a honeymoon with my husband. And we were kind of tossing around the idea of where to travel to. And he said, well, let's go to the happiest place on earth. And I honestly thought we were going to Disney World. We were not going to Disney World. There's a country called Bhutan. It was like this little tiny country nestled in the Himalayan mountains. And they are unique in that they are the only government in the world that genuinely measures happiness as an index of success for their population, which to me was absolutely fascinating. So before I went, another deep dive into Bhutan and what it was all about. And I learned a lot about this thing called the Gross National Happiness Index, which is their kind of every other year they measure their population on 9 factors that contribute to happiness. And I found it really interesting because they measured what you might expect to see on there. So, like health and education. They measured well being, sense of well being. But a couple of things that really struck me was that they measured your feeling on how much control you have on your own time. Like, do you feel like you get to control your time doing the things that matter to you? And I thought, oh, this is so interesting because I've never tied that to happiness before. But it really made me think about like it makes sense. Like if you have to spend 80 hours a week doing something you don't love versus being able to do 80 hours, which well, you shouldn't work that many hours anyways, but that's beside the point. But like if you could spend your time doing something that really fueled you and made you feel good, whatever that ends up being, you probably would feel a lot happier. Then they measured things like sense of community. Do you like the sense of community increases statistically someone's measure of happiness? So do we foster a sense of community in where we live in our day-to-day lives? Like what does that mean? And then they even put in like kind of bigger scale things like nature fundamentally makes people happy. So because they know that, they've committed to keeping their country forever to at a 60 to 70% forced. Like they will not do it because that is actually an important thing for people's happiness. And so when I was in Bhutan, I learned a lot about their culture and I got to witness genuine joy throughout that country and how people live their day-to-day lives. And I was really touched that I felt like their government was like, it's one thing to say that you care about it, but it's one thing to actually make policies around it. And I could see that they were making like that, like governmental level um, policies about helping people maintain happiness. And I've shared this Bhutan story with people, and I've definitely had people push back and say things like, well, like, Bhutan's a really small country, so it's really easy to control that. They've had a turmoil political past. And I'm not here to say that I think everything they've done is perfect. I do understand that them, like almost every other country, has had a political past that they may not be super excited about or whatever it is. But I feel like I am very respectful that they are taking a stance on something that I think is really, really important. And I don't think a lot of governments will say they value the happiness and the well-being of their population, but I don't actually always see it in action. So regardless, I feel like I walked away from that trip in Bhutan as kind of that third major turning point for me, to establish and create happiness in people's lives. And what does that actually mean? And hence the birth of the Joy Avenue.
I love that story, Ellen. Like, it's amazing how many of my guests or people that I bring in that are so passionate about something that they have such a deep personal connection with. And that's part of their trigger for getting so excited about it and doing that deep dive on it. Although I find it funny that you're overachieving at studying those things, right? When the goal was to be because I want to talk about high functioning because that's would have been my response too. It's like, well, and the same thing happened when I've like personally struggled with PMDD. I was like, well, holy shit, now I'm just going to spend 70 hours studying PMDD to figure out what it's all about, which probably like worsened my, experience over the next 3 months. But I want to talk specifically about this piece around high functioning anxiety because I think
Mhm.
when we ask patients if they're anxious, right, the things that cross their mind about what anxiety looks and feels like to them, I think they can imagine the panic attack, the sweaty palms, the racing heart, that fight or flight in literally its most literal terms, right? But in my conversations that I've had with you and what I've learned from connecting with you is that there are these subtle symptoms and experience of anxiety that show up in women that I don't know if we're always labeling as anxiety. I would love for us to go through what that looks like because I think even when you're recounting your own story, you're saying, I felt like an imposter. I felt like, I dove into my work and I worked 80 hours. Like there were probably a lot of people benefiting from your behavior
Mhm.
and your hard work.
Mhm.
And I think there's lots of women that are in that situation where they're being rewarded for some
Mhm.
of these behaviors.
Mhm.
Can you talk us through like what does it actually mean to have high functioning anxiety?
Mhm. So I'm going to back one step and talk a little bit about why this often gets missed. And it's very related to what you said, which is the fact that we think of anxiety as the panic attacks, the like freezing, the all the physical symptoms, the sweaty palms and the shortness of breath and all that kind of stuff. And it's very interesting because when we measure anxiety from a clinical perspective, there's lots of different measures you can use to measure anxiety. The majority of them ask very similar questions, but there's often one, well, actually in defining the results to these tests, it often says like a higher score is correlated with a functional impairment. Now, functional impairment is really just a fancy way of saying, um, is are these symptoms affecting your ability to function in life, right? And so a lot of that, are you able to function in life, comes down to the measure of are you able to do your work? Can you take care of things at home? And are you getting along with other people? That's our measure of functional impairment. The interesting thing about people with high functioning anxiety is that they, instead of freezing, they work harder. They push through. These women are all excelling. They are overachievers. They're being described as confident, capable people you can count on for anything. But internally, they are struggling. And that is the definition of high functioning anxiety. It's the women who feel anxious, but do not have that functional impairment because they are high functioning. So they are the people who push through. They do more. They become even more to deal with that um, that high functioning anxiety. And so, very commonly, what you'll see with these women aren't the typical panic attacks, but what they will have physically is they feel exhausted because they're one, physically pushing themselves to do more and work longer hours, but also because their mind never rests. So they're physically exhausted, they're mentally exhausted. They have trouble sleeping because their mind doesn't stop. A lot of these women will have digestive issues, okay, because it's either the stress component to it or just they're not eating necessarily well because they are, working too much or all those habit things that we can talk about. From an emotional perspective, a lot of these women, again, are exhausted, but they feel a lot of guilt, a lot of self doubt, a lot of anger, a lot of resentment and sadness for what's going on. And then mentally, it's a lot of negative self talk, a lot of relentless mental chatter with the most common ones I've seen are I'm not good enough, I'm not smart enough, I have to be perfect. Like perfectionism is a huge thing for these women. What will people think of me? I can't say no. I should be doing more. These are the most common things that end up fueling the behaviors and how the women with high functioning anxiety tend to cope. And um, I think it's a little bit like what you said. People around them give them a lot of positive feedback for working so hard and producing so much and doing all that things and all those things. And I mean, there's two parts of this. There's the can we be as accomplished and as successful when the drive behind that success is coming from a place of calm and joy and happiness versus a place of stress and worrying about what other people will think about us, and the balance between that and being able to recognize and respect your own boundaries so that you're not pumping 80 hours of work for someone who's asked you to pump out 80 hours of work because that's just not reasonable. So now you're doing two people's job for in one body, right? So it's interesting because a lot of women will come to me and they will love what we've laid out in terms of how we're going to tackle the struggle and how they're feeling. But then there's this little thing that they kind of say, what if I get, treatment or management or whatever it is, but then I stop being as productive? Because now we live off this productive high because we were known as the person who could produce more than everyone else. So what if suddenly I'm less than because I manage this feeling and I no longer push myself as hard? And that is actually a fear that we have to overcome. Like I will work with the women to overcome because chances are, because they're such overachievers, even if they cut their work back by even 50%, they're probably still achieving quite a bit. But we have to talk about how much your self worth and your self identity comes from overdoing. Let's do a good job. We don't have to overdo to get that praise in order to fuel us to do it again, because now we're in this vicious cycle of people think I can do more. So each time I must do more. So then the next time I got to do even more. And it's like this cycle. It's a vicious cycle that doesn't
Yeah, I feel like you're talking about like every single woman. And so I wish I knew what the actual statistics on this were because I feel like there's hints of that in every woman, right? And I use that term like we give a lot of gold stars for really bad behavior, right? That
end.
that we were reinforcing that within ourselves and with each other. That when our expectations are this basically unachievable and yet we still work to achieve them, we're reinforcing this negative leadership, negative workplace, negative all of those things, right? And imagine how different things could be if we didn't, if what our identity wasn't so tied to that productivity.
Mhm. Mhm. I think there's a lot of there's a lot of reward for do going the extra mile and doing the extra thing. And like I said, there's a fine balance between going above and beyond because you really want to go above and beyond and help someone, and that respect for self boundaries.
hmm hmm It's interesting. I think of this example, and I don't know where along the way. I think this was an evolution for me to learn this, but the example that always sticks out in my mind is when I wrote my second year board exams for naturopathic college.
Mhm.
I got 99% on my board exams. I got one question wrong out of the whole thing. And I remember when I got my results back, I'm like, I just wasted my whole summer, right? Like my reaction was like, why, Jordan? Why did you do that? Everyone moves on. Everyone who gets above 70 graduates. Why did you do that to yourself? And it took a long time for me to actually embody that belief that I didn't need to get 99 or 100% on everything, and actually incorporate it into my work ethic, right? So that it wasn't that, but definitely suffered with that because I was that kid, right? I was that kid who got all the good grades. And then I was like, well, what happens if you don't get good grades? Or what happens if you like just do good enough? Right? What would that mean? And it took like those kinds of like aha moments to be like, that was a waste. And actually, I'm going to totally go off on a tangent. When I was in high school, one of my friends was killed in a car accident when I was in high school. And we were in biology class together, and we'd written a test on the Friday, and she was killed in a car accident on the Saturday. And it was really devastating for my whole high school, and the whole community was really shocked and rocked by it. I went to a really small high school. And when I went in on the Monday morning, and not many of us actually even physically made it to school on the Monday morning, but I went to biology because I wanted to see my teacher because I was close with her. And I asked her what my friend had got on her test. And she got a 74. And this girl was similar to me. Like she just had like excelled at everything, like amazing marks all the time. And I have to tell you, I was so relieved that she had kind of got a B on that test. And it stuck with me from that moment that like she hadn't spent that week before really cramming for that test, and how grateful I was for that.
Mm.
um, I've tried so hard with these like little moments to be reminded of like what like life is actually
Mhm.
about. Like, what are we
Mhm.
actually doing here? Are we
Mhm.
actually here to get 99% on an anatomy test that no
Mhm.
one cares about?
Mhm.
um yeah, it just made me think of both of those examples, like because they're two sort of stark opposites, where on one hand I was so relieved that this young woman didn't spend the last week of her life studying for a biology test that never mattered, but
Mhm.
also that I was a victim of that myself, where
Mhm.
I wasted an entire summer living in Toronto, locked in a library for what?
Mhm. Mhm.
So these high functioning women, which, like I
Mhm.
said, I think you just mentioned all women that I work with ever. I don't think we're acknowledging these symptoms, like you said, because the level of impairment isn't there, right? Like
Mhm.
they're doing amazing on
Mhm.
paper.
Mhm.
Um, but what should women be looking for within themselves, right? Like you linked it up with how that not feeling that joy, is
Mhm.
that what they're looking for? I mean, beyond the fatigue and things, like how do women know that this is a problem?
Mhm. I think if you feel those physical and emotional symptoms, like I said, you would know if you're that person who has that kind of relentless mental chatter. And that's the thing that's pushing you to do more and be more. I think that's a really, really key thing for us to think about. And fundamentally asking yourself, do you feel calm, confident, and happy? I think those are some really key factors to be asking yourself. Like it's really easy to go to bed at night and being like, I mean, you and I literally just had this conversation about our to-do lists and how do we keep track of our productivity. and and it's really easy to go to bed at night and just kind of check off all of those things and say to yourself, ah, there, it was a good day. It was a good day because I checked everything off. But I want women to start asking themselves when you go to bed at night, like, was it a good day because I had moments of joy and happiness in my life? Did I create joy and happiness for someone else around me that I really care about? Did I live most of my day frantically jumping from one thing to another? Or did I accomplish what I had wanted to accomplish? One, because I wanted to accomplish it. And two, did I feel good when I was doing it? I think those are some really big differences between kind of rushing through our day and getting through it and being like, there, I did it, versus being like, I genuinely had a good day today.
Mhm. So it's like taking that to-do list that one step further, right? To contextualize
Mhm.
the day a little bit more. I've
Mhm.
seen that as taking your gratitude practice that one step further, same
Mhm.
thing, right? Like I'm grateful for this book that I'm reading. That to take it that one step further, I'm grateful for this book that I'm reading that was recommended by this friend that I've had for 20 years. And I'm so happy that she knows me so well to recommend this book.
Mhm.
Right. And that the
Mhm.
gratitude growth that comes from tying it to people and experiences is
Mhm.
actually much greater than just writing down
Mhm.
that you were grateful for the book.
Mhm.
Is that what
Mhm.
you're saying? Is that the same kind of
It
example?
is like and is perfect example. Um, I mean, it's either interesting. You actually just kind of made me think about something that I because a lot of people come to our offices and will have done anxiety questionnaires, will have done whatever questionnaires, and we are in a society that, for the most part, tests and evaluates what we care about. So we in schools measure competencies, the learning objectives, things like that. As medical professionals, we pick to test things that we think measure how well that person is doing. But what has always struck me as really interesting is we are in a society that measures a lot of illness. We don't really have a lot of measures that measure wellness. We kind of like got the person's anxiety score from really high to less high. And we celebrate that because they're not anxious anymore. But where does that leave that person? Because, again, fundamentally, I think most people, if you ask them how they want to feel, they don't go, I just don't want to feel anxious. But like fundamentally, is that your endpoint? And they're kind of like, no, like, I want to feel happy. I want to feel good. So we do a lot of things that bring people from like a negative to a neutral. But yet, fundamentally, people don't want to feel neutral. They want to feel good. They want to feel happy. They want to feel vibrant. They want to feel energetic, right? Like it's not neutral. And yet, almost everything we measure, we stop at neutral as if that's the success point. We did it. That's
Mhm.
it. We've measured the
Neutral
illness.
or function,
Yeah, you're
right? Like
functioning.
there's
You're
even
okay.
yeah, there's some like horrific research on menstrual cramps. And I only call it horrific because it's measuring if the women went back to their sport, not if they were pain free in their sport. So
Mm,
the level of success was like, oh yeah, she went back on the soccer field. She
mm,
was still in pain, but at least she played,
mhm,
right? And like that was their primary endpoint was not for her to be pain free. It was for her to
mhm,
not miss the game.
mhm. And what is that really telling that person too?
Right. And these were young women we're studying, right? Like, what are we
Mhm,
telling those women? If we're like,
mhm,
oh, great, you succeeded, you got back
mhm,
on the field.
mhm. Did they feel good doing it, or did they have to take, 5 other different painkillers to get them to that
Right. Yeah.
spot?
I love this perspective, Ellen. I feel like it's so valuable because, I mean, one of my purposes with the podcast is to teach women self advocacy skills in their
Mm,
healthcare. And this is one of those beautiful examples is that just because you're getting the boxes checked, right? Or we can't find anything like wrong medically, it doesn't
mhm,
mean you're living your best life.
mhm, mhm. And I think we're like, the women that I work with, like, we're kind of tired of feeling okay. Like, we get it. We can do things that make us feel okay. But I don't think fundamentally a lot of people think okay is necessarily enough. Like, they want to feel good and they want to feel happy. And I tell women this all the time, like, we can do a lot of things that help you get back to neutral, but when it comes to going from neutral to happy, like that is genuinely a lifestyle and mindset shift. Because I cannot give you a pill. I can give you a pill to make you feel calm. I can't give you a pill to make you feel happy. Well, like not a legal one, maybe.
Not a long term sustainable solution. Let's call
Yeah.
it that.
so so and it yeah, I feel like I would love to see, throwing this out there, um, can we start measuring like wellness and happiness as our end goal to something as opposed to like if we measure what we value, then let's start measuring happiness, well-being, what sense of wellness. I think that should be our end goal. I don't think we should just
Mhm.
focus all of our efforts on getting everybody to a neutral point. And I'm not saying neutral is, again, it's not about neutral not being good. I'm pointing out that we have this massive gap on the other side of neutral that we haven't really talked
Mhm.
about
It's not
yet.
the end.
Yeah.
It shouldn't be the end.
Hmm. Hmm.
Yeah. And so are there things that women can do for like from a self-assessment perspective, right? Because again, thinking about the fact that if they're going to their healthcare provider saying, something is off, I don't feel great, I'm tired, I'm struggling with my sleep, do you walk women through this process of like looking at their lifestyle and all of those sort of pillars that are related to what creates or co-creates her health? Like how can women do sort of that bird's eye view of her situation to see what those things are that may be impacting her high functioning anxiety?
hmm So when it comes to kind of a health journey perspective, um, definitely laying down some foundations. And so this is a unique population to work with, because if you give them 10 things to do, they will do all 10 things to the 20th degree.
Perfectly.
And yeah, perfectly, and then some. They'll have done it perfectly and come back and be like, I did five more and I did those two. So it's about laying down foundations. And by that I kind of mean talking about, yes, talking about nutrition, yes, talking about sleep, yes, talking about routines that help, but really narrowing down strategically which things need to be there. Because there is that tendency for women with high functioning anxiety to do everything perfectly. So if we're going to do things perfectly, which three things with respect to diet should we probably focus on? Which three things are we going to focus on with respect to movement and exercise? And this very, very early on in my career, I would make the mistake of being like, okay, well, let's do all the sleep, all the nutrition, all the exercising all at one time. And then it's stressful to do all those things at one time. So there actually needs to be like a strategic method and approach to figuring out which of these we need to tackle first, but then also what's the most important thing we need to do. We do not need to eat perfect diets 100% of the time to feel better or to feel good, right? And I know you talk a lot about this with the women you work with. And again, sleep. No one has perfect sleep 100% of the time. What is it that we need to get you feeling good? What is that? What do we need to focus on? Same thing with routines. Women with high functioning anxiety love routines. But they also love putting routines on because they heard that it was good for them. Not every routine needs to be implemented for you. We just need to figure out which of these routines actually serve a purpose to move the needle for you towards how you want to feel, right? So once that kind of foundational stuff is, then I usually talk a lot about kind of the emotional resilience and visualizations and things that actually help. So with high functioning anxiety, because there is such a relentless mental chatter, it's really difficult to tell that person to sit down and meditate. It often doesn't work because now they're frustrated on top of the fact that they're already flustered because of all the thoughts going through their mind. And now they're even frustrated because they can't do it properly. They can't do it perfectly. I'm going to say this right now: nobody meditates perfectly. Everybody's mind wanders, but it's just a matter of how do we put in things like meditation and visualization, not to fully get rid of the mental chatter, because that's not going to be the thing that fully gets rid of it, but how do you um, behavioral psychologists call this surfing the urge, or urge surfing, and it's really about how to not react immediately to the thought that you just had. So for example, I'm not good enough, I'm gonna like dump down extra hours to make that thing perfect to show somebody that I am good enough. Like once you have that thought, how do we surf that urge to now take some time and build that resiliency there so we don't immediately react to that and then go back into our vicious cycle of behavior and thoughts and actions. Um, I also take some time to do a little bit of, um, from a naturopathic perspective, like optimizing brain health, making sure that we replenish stores. These people are typically extremely depleted, extremely exhausted. How do we replenish that so that you do feel better? Um, and then finally working on that mindset piece, because I really don't think, I love naturopathic medicine and everything we have to offer. I just have yet to find a magical supplement or diet or lifestyle that can help people get rid of their mental chatter for good. And I think that's the missing piece to a lot of this, because again, you can take medication, supplements, whatever, and get rid of that physical sensation, but what's going through your mind has to be worked on that level. And so you do need to find something that works for you to help with that kind of personal development, unlearning all those negative thoughts that drive us to do what we do. Did that
Is
answer
there
your question?
Totally,
Okay.
totally answered my question. Yeah, because my question was like kind of like how can women sort of self-assess where they're at? And I think you gave some really great sort of I talked about like those pillars, right, of foundational health, right? And looking at the nutrition piece and the diet piece and seeing like how their life and lifestyle is maybe be supporting or not supporting them. No, you definitely I think those are really good sort of take home pieces, right, for those women. And they probably have tried to skirt around treating the anxiety by treating some of those things in isolation, right?
Mhm,
Like, what have you got for sleep, right? When the root of my sleep issue is actually my anxiety,
mhm,
and then maybe have found that solutions for sleep have not been
mhm,
particularly effective for them,
mhm,
right?
mhm,
I'm curious around like some of the fear though when we start to have these conversations with women because I'm going to relate it back to like intuitive eating, right? When we talk to women about trying to trust themselves and eat more intuitively, they imagine they're going to like, shove their head into a cookie jar and not come out until they've eaten everything. I see that same perception around women where we start to talk about disassociating their worth with productivity and talking about rest and talking about it comes out as this self-indulgent, selfish, I'm going to throw the L word in there, lazy way of
mhm,
being. Women are worried that if they take their foot off the gas, that they become lazy,
mhm,
right? And everything that goes along with what they've decided the meaning of lazy actually is.
mhm,
The way I usually approach that, well, I ask with those women, I'm like, well, do you call other women who go to bed at a reasonable hour lazy? Right? Like, would we ever use that language to describe someone else only working 40 hours? Would we call her lazy? But I'd love to know sort of what you've experienced because I think that that fear is really real for women, especially when they've tied a lot of their worth to their productivity.
mhm. I'm gonna make an educated generalization or an experienced generalization. Um, Oftentimes, the women that I work with who do have all of those thoughts, I want to know how much of this is because they're worried about what other people think of them. And I think that's the first thought we need to work on because logically, they know they're not lazy. They do way more work than other people around them. And like you said, they wouldn't call other people lazy. And I think it comes down to, oftentimes, it comes down to, I'm worried what other people are going to think of me. That like you call yourself lazy because you genuinely think you're lazy, or you think someone else is going to suddenly interpret your slightly decreased output and call you lazy. So, and I think more often than not, it comes down to I'm actually worried about what other people's judgment of me is. And then I think that's the first thought we need to work on that perception. And then the second thing I'll often say is I think it's time we break up with your inner bully because that voice that is just really an accumulation of your experiences, your perceptions of other people's perception of you, like the story you're telling yourself all through the years, whether it's society taught us, I don't know, whoever was influential in and around your life taught you. It doesn't really matter how these voices got there, but most of us have an inner bully. And that's the voice that tells us that we're not good enough. We have to keep doing it this way, or else what will people think? And you're so lazy. Like that voice doesn't need to exist. And and again, it's like what you said. Would you ever use that voice in that tone to talk to your best friend? Would you ever use that voice in that tone to talk to your child, your daughters, the people you love? And if the answer is no, then we shouldn't let that voice talk to us ourselves that way either. And so I often walk women through like a 10-step thing of um they're 10 like kind of easy to implement steps of how how do we break up with our inner bully or our inner mean girl, whichever one you resonate with more. Um, because it's time. Like it's time we speak to ourselves from a place of love and compassion and support. Like let's all have an inner supportive best friend instead of an inner bully, and let that inner supportive best friend be the voice that fuels your day and drives your decisions, as opposed to that inner bully that doesn't need to be there.
Mhm. As I'm listening to you, I'm imagining that woman who's ready to kind of make that change, like that. I like that saying that like the fear or staying the same has to become, or the fear of staying the same has to be greater than the fear of change, essentially, right? That like I think the things that we maybe would love for that woman to move towards or progress towards are going to be scary, right? Like
Mhm,
scary things to have to address some of those things head on to make shifts that are uncomfortable. I remember days where I sat in the hot tub in the middle of the day going like, "Oh my god, Jordan, like what are you doing?" Right? Like this is such a waste of time. And
you're
it took
living
so
life, Jordan.
I know, I know. But it took a long time for me to like be able to sit in that calm nervous system in the middle of the day when it was totally fine. No one was waiting for me to do anything. But it's hard, right? It's
Mhm,
discomfort. It's like I like that Glennon Doyle, like staying on your mat kind of feeling, where it's like, okay, I'm not doing anything, I'm not being productive, I'm just listening to music,
mhm,
but it's still so valuable, and
mhm,
it's hard to. Or one of the things I struggle with in practice is to get women to lean into that discomfort and
mhm,
repeat, like
mhm,
repeat the
mhm,
action no matter how uncomfortable it is, because the greater gains in her creativity and her happiness and all of the things that she wants are on the other side of her actually taking care of herself,
mhm,
not in the hamster wheel version of her life that she's currently in.
mhm, mhm. I think I actually just had a conversation with a client this weekend on the exact same thing. She's definitely that overachiever, and she really just actually like sent me an email saying, like, I love that we're working together. I love that I'm taking this opportunity to work with you, but I'm actually scared that I'm going to become a lazy person. Like, I'm really scared that I'm actually just going to stop doing work. And I'm like, you never in history of this has ever happened. Like, you are not going to suddenly decide that instead of going to work, you're going to lie in bed all day and watch Netflix and ignore your deadlines and, hang up on your manager. Like, this is not actually going to happen. You are not going to suddenly flip and become a different person. You are going to continue to do a good job, but you're now going to be able to draw healthy boundaries. Healthy boundaries doesn't mean you're going to throw the towel in and not do work, but you are going to say, I've already put in a lot of hours to this thing. Maybe we actually need another person on this. Maybe it's not meant for me to do it all on my own. Or maybe we need to extend the deadline, right? Like these are okay things to have honest conversations with whoever, you need to have these conversations with, but it's also that you're still going to do your job. Like no treatment. I don't care what treatment you pick is going to suddenly make you like no management. Nobody you see is going to suddenly be like, "Here, do this," and tomorrow you're not going to care. You're just going to quit your job and just be like, "I don't care about my life
But
anymore. Who
we're so
cares?"
black
Like,
and white. That's how we
yeah.
think about everything, right? It's like we're on a diet or it's a complete dumpster fire.
Mhm,
People can't live in that in between and imagine. We don't know what B plus looks like,
mhm,
right? Like we don't know how to live in the B plus range
mhm,
comfortably.
mhm. And it's like, can you like, I actually get people to imagine this. I'm like, could you imagine if you could go to work and feel really good about what you're doing and then be able to confidently speak up if something isn't right for you, whether it's you do need to reduce the workload or hire someone else or extend the deadline. Like, imagine if you could confidently like just go into work and be like, I'm going to do a good job. I am damn good at doing my job, and this other stuff that's happening, it's not a reflection of me. It's a reflection of that there's something wrong with the process or the system, and we need to address that so that I can continue to be good at my job without all the negative stuff that comes with this, and working twice as much as I or twice as many hours or whatever. And like they just kind of stop and they're like, oh, like that'd be really awesome. But like, can we actually get there? I'm like, yes, we can. We can. But now, like, imagine if our whole world was like that. Imagine if every woman had that confidence and that, that self assurance to kind of be like, no, I know I'm doing a good job. And, you obviously will reflect if you need to do a better job, but that's hardly the issue. Most of the times, it's actually you're doing a fantastic job. It's just what you're expected to do, and the systems around you and the processes are kind of broken. And that needs to get repaired, right? So imagine if we could all feel so good and confident about ourselves that we could do this.
Things would be good. the
Mhm.
world would be good.
Mhm.
I'm so grateful to be having this conversation, Ellen. I feel like it's just an extension of so many of the things that we've talked about over the last couple of years on the podcast.
Mm.
So I'm so thankful for you to share this expertise. To me, I felt like the conversation we were missing around anxiety was what that high functioning anxiety piece looks like, because like you mentioned, the way we evaluate people for their anxiety is not always picking up on these women, right? It's not
Mhm.
catching women because we're looking at them from a level of like function versus dysfunction, and
Mhm.
not happiness versus right? Like
Mhm.
we're really not measuring them on the metrics that matter to the women.
Mhm.
Um and I think that's really bringing it to light and maybe giving some of our women that are listening some language to be able to describe the way that they feel, whether it's the chatter, whether it's, flat out high functioning anxiety, and start to
Mhm.
examine those parts of themselves and the expectations they have of themselves that are maybe, fueling this fire for them. You work with women. I would love if you could kind of wrap up by helping our listeners understand where they can connect with you and the information that you put out about supporting women, and any like lasting thoughts that you have to leave our listeners with would be so great.
Mhm. First of all, I think that if you are someone who is struggling with this, please reach out. Whoever your healthcare practitioner is, somebody that you trust can help you with this, please reach out, because I do not believe, actually, today's International Women's Day. So we're recording this on
It
International Women's Day.
is.
um,
Yeah,
like, really, no woman should have to or needs to struggle alone. I assure you, there's people around you who feel the exact same way as you are. And so reach out to somebody you trust and feel comfortable asking for guidance to go from how you're feeling to feeling that calm, confident, self assured, happy place that you deserve to be. I forgot your second question. Oh, to get in touch with me.
yeah, how do they get in touch with you?
Got lost there for a second.
Got lost in your passion.
Yeah. Okay. So, um, to get in touch with me, best thing to do is definitely follow me on social media. So Instagram is where I post a lot of information about high functioning anxiety, what to do, tips, strategies, things like that. So that's at the Joy Avenue on Instagram. And I'm happy to share my 10 steps to breaking up with your inner bully with your audience, if that's something that I
That would be
can
great.
give
If
you
we'll throw the
join.
link to that in the show notes, so that, and what would
Mhm.
they expect to receive when they grab that?
So it's a guide that walks you through 10 easy to implement, and I promise they're easy to implement steps to being able to break up with that inner bully, the voice that tells you you're not good enough, that you should be doing more, and that resting is lazy, and what will that person think of me? That's the voice that I want you to make a decision that you do not have to put up with anymore in your life. So happy to share that with your audience. And I'd also maybe like leave off with this one small technique that brings people joy and happiness in their life, if that's something that you're good with. It's a really, really easy exercise to do. And they've actually measured people doing this and found that they do feel happier over time. And so the first thing you have to do, four step process. The first thing is actually recognize what brings you joy. And this is an interesting thing because a lot of people kind of go, oh, well, what does bring me joy during the day? The second thing is I want you to capture that moment of joy, however you want to capture it. Some people like taking pictures with their phone, some people like writing it down in their journal. It doesn't really matter. I want you to take the intention, even if it's super fast, like snapping a picture on your phone, to capture that moment of joy. Thirdly, this is the most important step, is I want you to revisit those joyful moments in your life. So if you're going to spend time scrolling through social media and that doesn't make you feel good, scroll through your camera roll, because you've now captured many, many moments of joy, and you can relive, when you look at those pictures, relive that moment and remind yourself what brought you joy and what can you be grateful for in that moment. And the fourth step is to repeat and rinse and repeat and do this every night. If you feel you need extra doses, 2 times a day is fine too. But the idea is to relive and put in the intention to go back and relive those joyful moments and genuinely feel it again. If you, and I'm notorious for having way too many food pictures on my phone because food gives me a lot of joy. And I love taking pictures of meals that I'm cooking, things that I'm eating, to the point where my friends who eat out with me literally go, everybody stop. Ellen's going to have to take a picture first. Just let her take a picture. But the point is that it captures a moment of joy, and review that. Spend the time to go back and remind yourself of all the little pieces of joyful moments you've had throughout your day.
I love that. That's such a great practical exercise. And I do think that everyone who is listening to this on their phone can probably manage that. Thank you so much, Ellen. I absolutely appreciate your brilliance and wisdom. And this has been a long journey for you to get to this place where you can offer so much wonderful support to women. And you really speak their language, I think. So if you don't follow Ellen on social media, please go do that. We will put the link in the show notes, because the little gems that she gives about this high functioning anxiety will really help you kind of move the needle forward and figure out at what point you need to start to seek some care and more support around how to move through this for yourself. So thank you so much, Ellen.
Thank you so much for having me.
I hope you enjoyed that episode of Women's Health Unplugged. It's my absolute passion to bring women quality and science-informed information about their health so that they can make empowered, good decisions about their health care. I'd like to invite you to join me in my Facebook community, Women's Health Unplugged. There we share live videos, blog posts, and behind-the-scenes information about the podcast, where you can connect with me and other women who are interested in their health care. You can find us at facebook.com/groups/WH Unplugged. We'll see you there.